Good morning to everyone. I'm Dr. Cook. I teach several classes at Tidewater Community College. This is my first year, full year at Tidewater Community College. So I appreciate the Student Center for this opportunity. So the classes that I have taught so far is U.S. Government, Basic of American Politics and International Relations. My focus area in that is comparative politics, and I teach around the dual enrollment process during the school year, the high school year with the public school systems. So today we're going to go what the Constitution is. We're going to look at it from a standpoint of what is the body of the Constitution, what articles really apply to us, and how do we see the amendments, and how do they actually focus on us as we have our civil liberties. But to start this off, we're going to start with Kahoots. So there's about 25 questions of Kahoots that are going to focus on the amendments and what the amendments are. It's okay if you get it wrong. We're going to clarify those as we go through the presentation, as we look at the Constitution and how we use the body of knowledge that govern us as individuals in this country, as citizens and residents. So I'll go ahead and get started. We have 4 players, and what we'll do is we'll go through the 25 questions, 25 statements that pertain to the amendment. So like I said, you don't have to get it right. We will discuss them as we get into the PowerPoint presentation after the follow-up of this. And if you have any questions along the way, let me know.
What was the game pin? I'm sorry.
I put it in the chat.
I don't think that's too loud, is it, Ms. Phillips?
No, you're great, Dr. Cook.
Okay, good job there. So the 9th Amendment, and as I say, we will discuss this in greater detail with the presentation. Good job, Ms. Young. Third Amendment, so we look at here, the 20th Amendment is nothing pertaining to soldiers. So this goes back to the American Revolutionary War. Yeah, the 23rd Amendment. Remember, the District of Columbia is not a state, so they were granted permission to actually be the vote for the president based on the 23rd Amendment. The right to bear arms, the Second Amendment. The 20th Amendment is the lame duck period for the Senate to actually take off of federal officials. That's the 20th Amendment. Good job, Ms. Young. This should be fairly easy. Good job, everyone there. Now you have a right to go to the polls free. You don't have to pay a tax. 24th Amendment gives you the right to go to the polls free. There's no poll tax anymore. So we look at that. Good job. Yep, the 16th Amendment, individual taxes, is at the end of the year, everybody wants to file taxes. So yeah, the 7th Amendment gives you the right to be tried by a jury. Okay, Mr. Abigail, I see you. Are you playing there, Miss Phillips?
No, I'm behind the scenes.
Okay. So the right to for free against discrimination is the 14th Amendment. We want to really pay attention to that one based on what's actually going on in current administration now. So that's one that you may want to pay attention to a little closer to. Okay, Miss, I think it's Sawan. I think that's your last name. I think I'm saying your name right. Miss Sawan, I see you on fire there. Okay, Mr. Sylvester, we looking for you. So this is 12th Amendment election process for the president. This is how we get into what the electoral college is and things of that nature. Okay, Smith, I see you. So this is 17th Amendment. It's the election process for senators. Going back, looking at this, beforehand, the state legislature used to appoint senators. Then we went to the popular vote for senators. So when we look at the 17th Amendment, it shows the process of how we elect senators for each state based on the popular vote. Okay. Okay, block 2, I see block 2. Y'all are doing well there. That's my DE government class. So this is the 15th Amendment, which we look at civil rights, which is called the Black suffrage. A lot of people know it is civil rights, but it is also the Black suffrage area. So when we look at that, and you also see the same area when you look at the women's suffrage, also within those areas. Okay. Like the 13th Amendment outlaws slavery in the United States. As we progress, you had different Civil Rights Act that played a part into that, but the 13th Amendment is what outlaws slavery. Okay, Ms. Young, you're back. This is your right to a speedy trial. Most cases in the United States, based on the Sixth Amendment, most of our cases don't go to a speedy trial. We end up using the plea bargaining system, which I would suggest and I would recommend that you read into the Sixth Amendment, because you have a right to be tried by your jury in a speedy trial and not to take the plea bargain. Not to say that anybody's in trouble, but just in case, you can be aware that the Sixth Amendment protects you in that. So the 11th Amendment protects states from being sued. So the federal government, looking at it from that standpoint, the federal government suing states, it protects the state from being sued if they don't want to comply with a federal government law. So one of the big things here we look at is the Affordable Care Act, which is known as Obamacare. A lot of states did not agree with the whole bill. So what they did is they redone the bill so that states would not be sued from that standpoint. Vermont was a big state in this one where they did not fully adapt the whole Affordable Care Act. They adapted a portion of it, so that prevented that state from being sued from the federal government. So that's protections on the 11th Amendment. So this is how you tell people to stay out the door when the police knocked at the door. You should have a little sheet of paper from a judge, signed by the judge. So there's the Fourth Amendment. So yeah, so anybody should come to your door as a law official that does not have that piece of paper signed by a judge, you can tell them to remove themselves from your property. And we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about this amendment for the Bill of Rights here shortly. Okay, the 18th, so we're looking at the 26th Amendment, which gives you the right to 18-year-olds to vote. This came about because soldiers were able to join the military at 18. So it came about saying that if a soldier is able to go into war at 18, he should be able to vote at 18, because the right to vote used to be at the age of 21. And previous to that, you had the right, you had to own property, you had to be a white male, and you had to have additional things to be able to vote. So when we look at this, the 18 years old come out of that, those challenges that we were faced with. So this is your right to say, I don't want to say what I did wrong.
I love these images, Dr. Cook.
Thank you. So we were getting there, yeah, you plead the fifth. That means you don't want to self-incriminate yourself. So we'll talk about that one a little bit here too. So remember that. You can plead the fifth, and just make sure you have a lawyer. One will be appointed for you. Yes, good job. 22nd Amendment guarantees the president, based on the Electoral College, 2 terms, 4-year terms, which is a total of 8 years from when we look at that. This should be easy one. It's your age that you're able to do this. So this should be practically easy. They kind of made this one make sense. is so this is the 18th Amendment, the prohibition of alcohol beverages. So now when we go back, you'll see later on that the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. So 18 gives you the right previous for prohibition to purchase alcohol. Then they say, oh no, we can't do that anymore. It's almost like cigarettes. We went back and we updated the law saying, hey, you got to be a certain age now to get cigarettes. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 21 years old to get cigarettes now. And it used to be 18. So a lot of people would say that one amendment canceled out the other one. The 18th canceled out, the 21st canceled out the 18th. So we get into the debate of how many amendments do we actually have. So this is the final amendment of the Bill of Rights, which give you as an individual your civil liberties and also the state their rights, to say that the state cannot be infringed upon from the national government, and you cannot be infringed upon based on the state of the federal government for the 10th Amendment. So you have a right to your natural born rights and the rights of the Bill of Rights based on who you are from 1 to 10. And we will see the Bill of Rights here in the presentation that I show. Congress continues to increase this amendment every 4 years, and I hope you pay attention to it. So Congress still receives a salary even after they're not elected into office, because this amendment says they can continue to get paid and they choose their own salary. So that's the 27th Amendment. So how would you like to know that you can choose your own salary every year? So they do it a lot. So it happens a lot. So I would tell you to pay attention to it. A lot of people ignore the 27th Amendment because they was like, oh, it deals with Congress, but it deals with your tax dollars. So make sure you pay attention to it. Because nothing is free. I tell people there's no such thing as free lunch. Somebody's paying for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So this is the 19th Amendment. We are actually celebrating 100 years of this amendment today. So the women's suffrage was a long haul. It continues to be a long haul. If you pay attention to state politics and you look at Virginia, Virginia is actually still in the process of adding another amendment for equality for women from a protection standpoint, because the federal government is trying to repeal portions of the 19th Amendment. And so Virginia has stepped in to say, hey, if women are part of our state and residents, we're going to protect them even though the federal government would not. And so the state has that right to do that when the government is not doing this part of infringing upon its residents. So this is the final question here. The 8th Amendment has the right, and it's that cruel and unusual punishment that can be outside of the law. If the law approaches you, this also is within the prison system, that you should not receive cruel and unusual punishment. Also in this bill, and we will look at it in the presentation, is excessive bail, that bail should not be at a limit that is not affordable. And that is a big issue that we have in our country now, where bail has exceeded sometime the crime or the conviction. So we will get into that. Let's see who's the winner. I think I know Ms. Young. I think DE government did a great job. I'm glad y'all are here. So y'all, it's something in class that's working. It may not be me, but hey, something is working in that class. So you got the top 3 from DE government. Great job. I'll make sure I give y'all bonus points for my class. So hey, we'll look at that. If I ever get to pass you, you have a Chick-fil-A meal on me. So hopefully I pass you somewhere along the way. I'll stop this here, Ms. Phillips, and then I'll pull up the presentation. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, and it'll say celebrating Constitution Day. So today is Constitution Day, where we celebrate This document that was actually drafted December 1787. So here we are. We're continuing to improve it. We are a nation that is getting better at what we are. The framers of this document wanted to continue a way that we can become a better society. So that's why the document is continuing to be worked. A lot of people will say, hey, it is the greatest document to ever exist. I'm in agreement with that. I think across the board, our Constitution gives us the freedom to go back and change and ratify and make new amendments. And as I mentioned earlier, I teach political science. I've taught international relations, basic political science, and most of my classes are in the DE environment or US government. So I tend to teach along those lines here at Tidewater Community College. So we look at why does the Constitution matter? And as we continue to go through this, don't hesitate to ask me questions. I want to be a facilitator, not a briefer. So ask me questions so that we can make this exciting. You don't get to hear my Southern dialect the whole time because it will interfere. And I asked Ms. Phillips to let me know when it's interfering. So let me know when it's interfering. So why does the Constitution matter? So when we look at the Constitution, it is a body of fundamental laws, which is how government operates. So it gives us these rules and bylaws and policies of how we're supposed to govern ourselves as American citizens and individuals that want to be American citizens, or individuals that may come here for a time period just to work based on immigrations or green card. So it gives us this body information. It is our supreme law. Our Supreme Court operates and make the law based on what the Constitution says. There's no other law higher than the Constitution based on the supreme of our law. States will have their own Constitution, but it does not override the US Constitution. Also, it explains how the government works, how the three branches are supposed to work together, and we'll look at that. How are they actually supposed to talk to each other? What happens when they don't talk to each other? What do we fall short? And it protects each one of our civil rights, and those are our civil liberties, the things that we are inherited to as our individualism, the things that we're supposed to gain by just being an American citizen, living in a constitutional democracy. And what does that really mean to us? So we look at this, here's a brief overview. So we're gonna look at the preamble, and you'll see the slide in the bottom, the photo there in the bottom left. Those 52 words there are the foundation really of the whole body of the Constitution. That we the people, it is about the people. Our Constitution is about you as a constituent. Yeah, we elect representation to represent us based on the Senate and the Congress, and that's on state, federal levels, but it's about you, and that's why your vote matters, and that's how we get into this whole thing of voter rights. That's your voice as an American, and we vote more than any other country, Western country in the world. We have a vote for everything, or a petition to vote for something. So we have to look at that body of language. And also we'll look at what the articles are. What is the substance of the government? We won't get into every section of it, but I highlight what I believe are the main sections of the articles and how we actually can look at those and actually become more aware of what goes on in our government. And also the first 10 amendments, we will look at the Bill of Rights, because this is the foundation. The Supreme Court of the United States actually make a lot of laws and that are constitutional or unconstitutional based on the Bill of Rights. So we want to look at that and what they are. So when we look at the 7 articles, so we're going to look at the legislative branch. We're going to look at the executive branch, judicial branch. We're also going to look at the relations among states, why states may totally disagree with the government. So if we look at a lot of times with the stimulus thing that happens during this pandemic, a lot of states say, hey, we don't really want your money because we don't want to pay it back. Because it's got to come from somewhere. Somebody has to pay it back. So we'll look at those relationships. And then we'll look at the amendment process. How do we get to a place where we create new laws? How do we ratify and change those new laws for the betterment of society? And 2 that we will highlight, but we won't go in detail, is national debt. How do we take care of national debt? What is national debt? I read something on Instagram that I thought was really funny, where somebody said the government is in more debt, but they give me a credit score. That's true. The government is in debt, but they give you a credit score to control your debt. And we'll look at how the oath of office is supposed to be based on that part. And then we'll look at requirements, and we'll highlight that. But I highlight the ratification process when I talk about the amendment process, because the ratification process of a bill is based on the amendment process to change a law and what we want to happen with those laws. So here are the 6 basic principles of the Constitution. Proper sovereignty, that meant that majority rules, that the popular vote would rule in a lot of ways. So the only time the popular vote does not count is when we look at the Electoral College. The Electoral College, if we go back, and some of my students may know this, is because we talked about it, is we go back to the New Jersey plan, where the New Jersey plan countered the Virginia plan, saying that, hey, large states should not always have the voice. What about the little small states over here? So we build this and we look at it moving forward and saying, hey, now how do we deal with this Electoral College? And so the Electoral College came out of that piece saying that, hey, we got to come up with a system that now treats every state as fair. We will see these battleground states that the president talk about, and you watch on the news that, hey, this state has more votes in that state. But at the end of the day, the whole purpose of it was that we have this majority vote, and the Constitution becomes a popular minority so that the people are the voice. And I just mentioned the Electoral College, it chooses the president. It's not by popular vote. And then as we progress through there, we go back and we look at state legislators used to elect the Senate. But then we went away from that and we said, hey, that's not working. So in 1913, we said, hey, it's going to be a popular vote. So every state now votes their senators in the House of Representatives based on a popular vote. So we look at this, we look at it from a standpoint of how do we get our popular sovereignty? How do each state has its own right, and how do you actually have your own individual rights? And it falls upon these 6 principles here of the Constitution. And so as we continue, you look in the bottom here, you see the President of the United States, you see the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and you also see the Attorney General. Each one of these individuals fall under a branch, but they all have what we call this limited government. They cannot just do what they want to do. I know a lot of times when people look at this, they say, oh, the president is doing what he wants to do. He's not doing what he wants to do. He's doing what he can do within the ramification of him being a part of the executive branch and the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States. So when we look at this constitutionalism and the rule of law. And the rule of law is just saying that the government is not the all-powerful thing. It is not all-powerful. It may seem that way, but they are not. And then we also look at the powers the government has and does not have are limited. So the executive branch has certain powers, the judicial branch has certain powers, and the legislative branch has certain powers. So when we look at these people, there's always a fight. And I know now there's a big fight about this $1.3 trillion for the stimulus package. It's going back and forth between the fight. The House of Representatives is saying one thing, the Senate is saying another thing. So this is what we get when we're looking at limited powers and saying, hey, you just can't do what you want to do. And now we look at separation power. So these are part of the 6 basic principles. So the U.S. president has the executive branch of the government. And so when he looks at it, he's totally different from the legislative branch. So when we look at our legislative branch, it's broken into 2 parts. Those 2 parts are the House of Representatives and the Senate. So each state has 2 senators, and the House of Representatives is based on the population. So after this census this year, the House of Representatives could increase because it's based on population. So one of the things that we look at from a constitutional standpoint, and it's talk now, is that can we increase the senators? Because just imagine if you're in California, it's 2 senators for California, but you have 53 House of Representative personnel, and you have to manage all that. So we look at this across the board. How do we separate these powers to make sure that everything is being done the right way? And then each branch has its own powers and their own responsibilities as we look at it across the board. And so this is where I was talking about earlier when we break this down, when we look at the executive branch at the top in the blue, we look over to the left, you have in the orange, the legislative branch, and yellow, the judicial branch. If we pay attention to this chart and we look at the arrows that are going around, each one of these actually owes something to the other. They just can't make decisions. So we look at the executive branch, and one of the things I want to highlight here is the president appoints judges to full vacancy. So those are federal judges. And so when those federal judges are appointed, they are there indefinitely. And one of the things that a lot of people don't look at it from the executive branch is that once these officials are elected, the current administration has elected about 130 federal judges that nobody really pays attention to. Those individuals are there indefinitely and they stay there. And so we have to really pay attention from that constitutional standpoint. And then we look at where the executive branch has to also talk to the legislative branch and the judicial branch, because they will let the president know, or the executive branch and those members know, hey, what you're doing is constitutional or unconstitutional. One of the things we can look at that just happened is the president actually signed an executive order to continue some of the benefits of the stimulus package. He said, okay, people still can't do this. So he said, hey, these are the things I want to continue. No, you don't have to pay student loans if you have student loans. I want to make sure certain things are affordable from that sense. So this is how we get into checks and balances. So as I said, each branch is not totally independent, and the powers have override powers. So as I mentioned about the president, the legislative branch and the judicial branch can override the executive branch. And when we look at the executive branch can also put a veto in to try to override what is going on in the legislative branch. So we need to pay attention to things of that nature. And so now we're gonna look at the judicial branch. This is a Supreme Court, this is a current photo. These are the individuals that sit at the highest office in our country. They are there until they decide to resign. They can be impeached, no different than the president, or they die in office. So we look at this right now in our country, we look at our Constitution as a review. For the individuals that sit here before you may not be in office within the next 2 years. And the president appoints the Supreme Court members, and they are confirmed by the Senate. And so looking at the bottom right corner there, you'll see how the Supreme Court is set up. So it's the highest court, and you have a court of appeals, then you have district court. So we look at this where the president determines these individuals and they're approved by Congress. And they look at things from what is constitutional. How does it support the Constitution? Does it support the Constitution? Does it not support the Constitution? One of the things I think most people may remember is when we had the marriage issue in our country, and everybody said those same-sex marriages should not be this, and you can agree or disagree, but the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional. So now you have a right based on gender, sex, to marry who you want based on that, because now it was an unconstitutional act. Now it's constitutional for you to marry who you want from that standpoint. And so now we look at this thing where state powers, and we call it federalism. So in our Constitution, we say, hey, the powers of the government, and you have powers of the state. So when they look at it from that standpoint, they have these things called shared power. But if the federal government is not doing something, the state has a right to come into play. Or if the federal government takes something away, the state can come in and say, hey, I want this to be implemented. So we go back and we look at what I just mentioned about the 19th Amendment. There were some things taken out of the 19th Amendment from a national federal standpoint. And Virginia said, hey, you're not going to treat our citizens like that, so we're going to implement this. And we want to come up with this new amendment to make sure that they're treated fairly and not discriminated against. And the biggest issue that we look at when we look at these powers is really more about protection than it is discrimination, because a lot of things happen when you're looking at the protection of people from a civil liberties standpoint. And whatever's left is the powers of the state, as I mentioned before. So as we transition from how we have the basic, we look at what the articles are. So Article 1 here, and the sections that I want to do is the key sections that I think are important, that if you don't read the whole thing, you don't want to read all 50, 60 pages. These are some things to look at. So this is Section 8, which limits all express powers from the government. It's got to be necessary and it's got to be proper from that clause. And also one of the things we want to look at, the Congress is given implied powers. So implied powers mean if they think something may happen or could happen, they have a right to say, hey, we want this to be a law. We want to implement this. We want to talk about this. And then we have Section 9. Section 9 is it prohibits certain actions from Congress. So the punishment of doing something before ex post facto, and when we look at this, it's illegal. If it was illegal, Congress can come and say, hey, I want to change this. I want to look at this from a different lens. And then also we look at it from the rights to challenge the courts. So Congress, based on this, can challenge the courts if they see something is not right. So a lot of time the first article come into play when we look at the president, when he does pardons, he can say, hey, I want to pardon this individual. He may pardon them from a sentence, from jail, but he may not pardon the conviction. So we look at that from that standpoint. So we look at Article 2 and Section 2, which states the president can appoint people to positions. And I talked about that, and most of these goes into federal judges, ambassadors, along those lines. But he has to get the approval from Senate. So regardless of who the president appoints, the Senate has to approve it. That's totally separate from the House of Representatives. This is totally looking at the Senate. Also, the Senate takes a majority and confirm that vote. And also Section 4, so because we run into an impeachment this year. So when we look at this impeachment process, the House of Representatives, from based on Article 2, the House of Representatives starts the impeachment process. It is up to the Senate to convict the impeachment. So you can be impeached, but not removed from office. So the House of Representatives can impeach you, and the Senate can say, yeah, you're impeached, but we want you to remain in office. And we saw that with 2 presidents. We saw it with Bill Clinton, and we saw it with President Trump. So we want to make sure we pay attention that a lot of people get the hurrah, hurrah when we say, oh, somebody's going to be impeached. Yeah, you can impeach me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be removed from office. So we need to play up, understand that both sides of how Congress works from that standpoint. And also we look here at Article 4, full faith and credit clause. So this is just saying that if I commit a crime in North Carolina and I move to Virginia, Virginia is going to send me back to North Carolina because it's where I committed the crime. So we look at this, that state is going to send me back to where I committed the crime. So that state has to adhere to that offense that I made, that accusation that I made in that state. They can't protect me. I can't come here and be a safe haven. It doesn't work that way. And then we look at it from the privilege of immunity. So say for instance, you want to move to North Carolina and you're not running from the cops, and hopefully you're not. When we look at it, you can go there. You have the same rights and privileges of everybody else that live in that state. So me, when I was in the military, moving here, moving from Georgia, I had the same rights in Georgia. When I moved here in Virginia, excuse me, I had the same rights that anybody that had been living here 100 years. So I'm entitled to those rights based on Article 4. And now we want to look at the formal amendment process from this standpoint. So when we look at Congress there in the top left, and then we look at the Capitol there on the right side, we look at this part that it must be proposed. So Congress has to propose the bill. They have to make it known that they want to make a change. And this is what the amendment process is really a change, a removal, a correction. So they have to make it known. So I'm a C-SPAN fan, so if you watch C-SPAN, C-SPAN usually lets you know everything that's going on the floor. And there was a time when we did not have media on the floor. C-SPAN kind of capitalized on that market where you go in and you can see what bill is being presented. And sometimes you want to look at it from what's been proposed. It's not just what the bill says on the outside. What is actually in the bill? What is the bill really doing? Because just because it has one big blurb, it doesn't mean that they're not earmarked things in there. Earmarked mean that money goes to additional places. I know looking back at the CARES Act, a lot of people got mad that Ruth Chris got almost $50 million. People were mad like, this taxpayer dollars, why would a restaurant get $50 million? But it was in the bill. So we look at it from that standpoint in this amendment process, and then we look at how do we ratify, and that's why I said earlier we won't get into 7, this ratification process. The House and the Senate has to approve that. Congress has to say, hey, we want to ratify this, and that's the House of Representatives and the Senator saying, hey, this is what we want. We approve this, and that's based on a 2/3 vote, based on the number that actually sit in the House and the Senate. And also this refers back to what I talked about earlier when we get into federalism. It goes back until where states has the rights, states have their own rights to protect themselves, to make sure that what the national government, the federal government is doing is actually in the benefit of that state and not just in the benefit of the self. So our framers came up with this process to make sure that the government did not get too big and the government did not start taking over states that did not, that may not have the resources. We look at states like, I'm a Mississippian. Mississippi does not have all the resources that Virginia has. So there may be some things that the federal government implement and say, hey, if we give you money, we want you to do this. The federal government cannot do that if it's infringing upon that state. And so that's how we get into this amendment process in federalism. So now we're going to talk about the things that really matter, and I think they are really important to you, and I think they are the 10 Amendment, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. And what do they actually do for you? So when we look at this, we typically know the First Amendment. The government cannot force any religion for the country, and the government cannot make you practice a religion. You have the right to practice, not believe, go where you want to go from a standpoint of religion. You have a right to the freedom of speech. I always tell people, you have a right to speak, but that does not mean that you don't have a right to be sued. So make sure when you're speaking that in that freedom, you understand what you're saying and what you're delivering, because you have that. Freedom of press, that's the media. And the freedom of assembly, we look at that from a standpoint of protest. You don't have a right to riot, but you have a right to protest or assembly. And you also have a right to petition. You have a right to sign a petition and get enough votes to say you want something to happen from that standpoint. Also, we know this, Virginia had a big case of this, the Second Amendment. They had actually people on the hills standing there at the Capitol here. The right to bear arms, saying you have a right to a weapon. You have a right to bear it. When we go back and we look at this law, it started off as a regulated militia. President Clinton kind of changed how we looked at this, how we look or how we see the right to bear arms. He gave more of an individual approach, saying, hey, you have a right to protect your property. But before that, it tied along more of the lines of having a militia. And this is how states actually kind of started National Guards, where the state has its own sovereignty to protect itself. And you have a right to stand out front of your house and protect your property when we look at it from that standpoint. The Third Amendment, and I put the red coats here, the Brits. So this came just before the American Revolutionary War, right after saying that, hey, soldiers cannot come in my house during wartime or peacetime, because there was a time in our country where, when we were still under the rule of the Brits, where a soldier could come in and take your food, take your house, and tell you to get out. Now that cannot happen. So soldiers cannot come in, and if they do, if the government say, hey, we want to occupy this space, the government is going to pay you for that space. So this goes into that they just cannot come in and take over. Now, we talked about the Fourth Amendment earlier when we were doing Kahoot. So this is come back with a warrant. You have, if somebody show up at your door, a law enforcement official, they cannot just search unless they have probable cause. So we look at this at the bottom, and it's pretty wordy, and I put it that way so we can make sure we look at it. So you have a right to secure your persons, that's you, your family, your houses, your property, and effects, unless there's a probable cause. The government saying, hey, something is going on, and there's an oath sign to say, hey, I'm coming to this place for this reason. That's also with your car. A lot of people to look at it from this standpoint, that if you get stopped, the police has to have a probable cause to search. Now, you can give away that if the police ask you, and you can say, yeah, you can search my car, but you deal with that when it happens. So that's always a touchy subject when we look at that one. The Fifth Amendment comes in, I plead the fifth. You cannot be charged for the same crime twice. So I let that float around a little bit. There's no such thing as double jeopardy. Also, protection against self-incrimination. So you can plead the fifth. You don't have to admit to a crime. And also due process by the law. So due process, when we look at this from this standpoint, is that you have a right to a trial. You have a right to all these things that come up next. So in a criminal trial, remember, a criminal trial must be speedy. And being speedy, it must be fair. It's public. It is not a private case. All public records for anybody are public. You can actually go online. You can pull them up. There's no secret to any of this. Also, the state where the crime committed, so you have to go back to that state unless a judge say, due to popularity of something that may happen, they move it out of that state for the protection of a client, a witness, or something like that. And also, you have a right to counsel. So you have a right to public defender. You have a right to purchase, pay for your own law, or not purchase, but pay for your own legal counsel. And you have a right to bring witnesses that are in your favor. So you have a right to bring those individuals to court. And as I mentioned earlier with the Sixth Amendment, we have become a country of plea bargains. So most cases don't even go to trial. Most people do a plea so they won't have to go to trial. But if we did trial, especially criminal trial, the judicial system will be overwhelmed. We don't have enough lawyers. We don't have enough individuals that would do jury duty to actually take care of the cases that we have, because there's a misinformation that crime has increased. Crime has always been a part of American history. We just started collecting information on it. So now we have just more statistics that it happened. So we have to be really mindful of that. The Seventh Amendment deals with common law. You have a right to, if somebody owe you $20, and $20 may not be a lot to you, and it may be a lot to somebody, you have a right to a civil trial for $20. You have a right to go down to the courthouse and say, hey, I want to sue whoever it is for $20. And there will be a full court case for it. There will be a full jury to say, how do you get your $20 back? How do I get this $20 back? So that's the whole process of the Seventh Amendment. And we look at the Eighth Amendment, and I mentioned this earlier, is that this is excessive bail should not be required. So we really get into this thing about excessive bail, because bail has increased over the years. It used to be where if an individual went to jail, it may be $100 to get out. Now it's $4,000 and $5,000, and you got to find a bail bondsman, because we create the bail bondsman system. And also excessive fines, there should not be excessive fines imposed upon the individual, and cruel and unusual punishment. And that's cruel and unusual punishment tied to a person that is a felon, convicted, in prison, in a hospital, that we have to treat people fair regardless of how we feel about it. If I go on a spree of killing people and I get captured, the cops are supposed to treat me fair. That doesn't mean that's just gonna happen, but that's what they're supposed to do. And then we have the 9th Amendment. This is the rights that are restrained by the people. So when we look at this, in other words, if there's something not in the Constitution, that does not mean it's not right. You can challenge that based on the 9th Amendment, and it could be something that need to be added to the Constitution. That's where we get our civil rights and civil liberties and our individualism. And that's how we change and we modify and we change the Constitution. And we look at these amendments for the betterment of the people. And also we look at now the 10th Amendment. This is the final one where we reserve the states reserve their power from the federal government to implement what they want. And that goes back, like I say, one of the biggest cases, and I mention this a lot, is the 19th Amendment, where we skirt it back a little bit. We skirt it back from a national standpoint. And also we look at this standpoint also from the civil rights, where we kind of skirt it back on certain things in our country where states are saying, hey, we're going to continue to enforce this. We're going to continue to give the residents of our state these properties and protections. So that's the last slide I have before we have any questions. So I would say if you have any questions, hopefully I didn't talk too fast. I just want to make sure we get through the information and that we talk about what the Constitution is and what it means. We got to realize this document has existed since it was adopted in 1787, December 1787. So we want to know that we can continue to prove this. The Constitution now resides in our hands. The baby boomers are retiring, so we are the next generation. So we have to make sure we set things up to make sure that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and we continue to improve our society for every citizen of this country and every citizen that wants to be a part of this country. That's all I have, Ms. Phillips. I will take questions if anybody have them.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. You have given us so much to chew on in this hour. And you did not speak too fast, and your twang didn't get in the way. I felt that I could absorb all of it. I'm looking forward to maybe some continual conversation about it in the Virtual Student Center with a discussion thread if you're available for it.
Yes, ma'am, no problem.
There's some folks in the room who would like to take your class. So I would like for you to take a minute before we take the questions, though, to talk a little bit about your background and how you came here to Tidewater Community College, and then share about the classes that you're teaching here.
Okay, yes, ma'am. So I came here to military. This was my last PCS with the military. I was stationed here and at the Suffolk complex over here off College Drive, in the Joint Staff Complex over in Suffolk off College Drive. I did 20 years, so July of this year was my 20th year for the military. My official retirement date is December of this year, so I'm in this transitional phase and on terminal leave. Thank you very much. While I was in the military, I have always seen the benefit of education, so I took every opportunity to get a doctoral degree through the military so I would not have to bear the burden of student loans. And I would tell people student loans are fine if you're trying to make yourself better than the situation you're already in, but I took advantage of coming to the military. I'm one of the 2 out of 6 generations from my family to leave home. I have about 100 family members in one city in the same place, and we overcrowd each other, so I wanted to leave. So I left. And but I would say the military has afforded me a lot of great opportunities, and that made me come here. And then so I'm a country boy by nature, and so Suffolk is no different. The roads are a little bigger, but the people are the same. I'll put it that way. So I decided to settle here. And
welcome here. We're glad to have you, Dr. Cook.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Did you want to talk a little bit about your classes?
Oh, yes, ma'am. So this is my first full year, and this is my second term of doing D government, U.S. government. So if you're in the high schools, you can take that course. But if you're on the TCC campus, coming in the spring, I typically teach international relations along with basic policies of government. So if you want to take those classes, you're more than welcome. I try to be flexible and understanding because I think we live in a society where most of us Google answers. And so I try to get people to understand that the Constitution is your documentation. It is your right as a citizen. And sometimes if you don't know those rights, you don't even know what you can be protected from. So I try to give all my students the understanding that, hey, this living, breathing document is here to support you. And it doesn't matter of race, gender, creed. It is your Constitution that all men are created equal.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cook.
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, I know we're already at 1:30, but if you can spend a little bit more time with us there, we're taking questions. Sylvester, did you want to speak?
I didn't have any questions. I just congratulations on your almost retirement date.
Thank you.
The information was great. I definitely would like to sit down more, well, virtually with all of this going on,
Okay.
have conversations with you. But you gave us a lot. There was a lot of meat to chew on for the day, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Whenever you want to do it, just let me know or get with Miss Phillips, or you can email me through TCC and we would do that.
Are there any other questions or comments for Dr. Cook?
So I have something, not to like intentionally postpone the conversation, but I think like, so I put in the chat that how does like what we're doing at the local level, our involvement at what's happening at the local and state level, influence what's happening at that federal level and the Constitution and all of our rights and the components that you talked about today, because like in particular right now, like the city of Portsmouth is going through some stuff.
Yes,
right, like that's a whole process that's happening right now, and I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about, you know, you have local representatives, you have state representatives that are involved in that process, and then you have you know, you have the NAACP and it falls under that right to assemble, and right. You know, all of those pieces are kind of like, it's a practical example right now with what's happening in the city of Portsmouth. And so I was wondering if you could kind of chime in on like the importance of understanding and processing and engaging in what's happening locally and at your state. To influence the overall process that's happening for our country.
So I think that a lot of times, and it's unfortunate that we're dealing in a time of civil unrest. I always tell people, and this is Lewis' term, this is not anybody else's term. I tell people we are really in a civil war. We use civil unrest, but we are in a civil war from that standpoint. And so when we look at what's going on at the local level, I tell my students is that you have to really understand that the local government has more effect on you than the state and also the federal government. So when you look at it, what officials are in office now from a local standpoint that have been elected, and how long have they been sitting there? Who is your mayor? What are they doing? What are those laws? What are they changing that you may not actually pay attention to? So when you look at that, I know Portsmouth just had a couple people resign, and somebody got fired, and then you had this whole issue with the magistrate of saying, hey, we want to sue these people. This should be a federal crime. But when we look at this from a standpoint, we have to understand that those laws that have been set by that city also affect state law. And so those state representations, the House of Representatives for the state of Virginia now has to play a part in what do we do now for the local government of Portsmouth? And then if it becomes bigger than that, those individuals now go through their Supreme Court system all the way up. And then they say, okay, how do we get to this place? And we have always been a country of pride, and we will always be a country of pride. So regardless of how we feel about the monument, it means something to somebody. So when we look at it back, what does that monument mean to the city of Portsmouth? What does it mean to the individual? And then what does that law say about that? Because at the end of the day, it's really about the law and what the Constitution and those policies say for that state. But I think sometimes we skip that because we were like, oh, I'm worried about the president, which we have a higher turnout for the presidential election than we do for the Senate and the House of Representatives. And people have to really focus that law is made in the legislative branch, and it has a long-term effect. The president, max of 8 years, will go on with his or her life. But the legislative, most of our House of Representatives, we getting a new group coming in now, but most of the Senate and Congress has served about 25 to 30 years. So those things matter, and that's at the state and the federal level.
Yeah, I know there was wasn't there an amendment proposed last year to institute term limits for congressional?
Yeah, so it's always on the table, but the thing about that is, I always say it's really funny that the people that are voting against that are the people that's elected. So you're never going to vote yourself out of a job.
Right.
Right. And that isn't that kind of like a challenge? I wonder if that's like, is that a flaw with the checks and balances system then? Because you have, you know, you shared earlier that these individuals are setting their own salary and they're deciding what it is that they're going to be paid, etc. But then they're also, I got this gig for life. So I think like that's a platform for a significant amount of corruption. And we've seen that within our own government. If I'm no longer there because the people have put me there and I have to maintain that,
Yeah, so we look at that from that standpoint is this is what we have the judicial branch for. The judicial branch should come in and say, hey, is this constitutional for a person to remain in office this long or not? But the problem that we typically have in our country is that nobody challenges it. That people remain in office for 40 and 50 years. And most people, based on how we have our political ideology and culture, most people typically go to the polls and vote the same way their parents vote. They don't challenge, like, maybe I don't believe, I tell people, I don't believe everything my mom believes. My mom
Right, and that's the value of critical thinking, right? And that's what we're also trying to foster here at Tidewater Community College. The city of Portsmouth was mentioned, so I'm just going to let you all know that there is a candidate forum today. If you are interested in attending the candidate forum via Zoom, send me an email directly at aphillips@tcc.edu, and I can forward you that information.
Good information.
Also, just want to chime in really quick because it is an election year and there's a lot of there are a lot of things happening. You can, if you're not currently registered to vote, you can register through October 13th. Mail-in is a thing. You can also just go to your local voter registration office and turn in. If you don't want to deal with the postal service, like, you can actually go do that too. But pay attention to what's happening in your local elections. I know that we have local and state on deck, as well as presidential. So it's not just the big one on November 3rd, although that's hugely important as well. It's definitely what we have going on at home. So thanks so much, Dr. Cook. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, no problem. And the last thing I have there was Phillips, and I always say, challenge the status quo. Always challenge the narrative. I tell students from a political standpoint, always challenge the narrative, because you don't know what you don't know. But the challenge that we have in our society, a lot of people know, they just choose not to investigate. So take the opportunity and use critical thinking to actually challenge what you may know. I watch about 7 different news outlets because I don't want to be biased. Make sure you challenge your own culture bias, your own culture bias.
Well, we'll be definitely hearing more from you, Dr. Cook. And thank you all for joining us today this afternoon. And we were always looking for information and feedback from you students on what we can do to make this experience while you're here as students, experience that you would like to have. We are always seeking insight on your needs and your interests so that we can provide you with the programming and opportunities that you're looking for. So don't hesitate to get in contact with any of us. Again, enroll in the Virtual Student Center and connect with your peers. There's information there about student organization, leadership opportunities, career opportunities. And so again, there's more to TCC than going to your classes. We're here to help you develop yourself personally and professionally. And so just, get connected and let us know what you need. Dr. Cook, we appreciate you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
All right. Bye, everyone.